Today, we're going to be going through everything that I did to create this particular seamless looping sci-fi-ish animation. It's a motion graphic, and we're going to go through all of the different thought processes that went into creating this so that you get an idea of all of the mistakes and different things that we try while creating things such as this. If you stick around till the end of the video, you'll also see the initial video that I had seen that gave inspiration to create this particular animation. From time to time, I'll pitch in what I was thinking when I was doing things that you'll see on screen. The entire video has been created and sped up to 2.5 times the original speed. The first thing that I thought I'd do is create a path for the camera to go around in a circle to create a simple endless loop. There are multiple ways of creating different loops, but I thought that for this particular animation, I'll go ahead with this particular method. Over here, I created the array of tori, I guess. I'm not sure what the plural is, but I created the array as a combination of two methods, which is why it wasn't really working the way I was trying. A much smarter method would have been to not at all use the curve for adding the toruses. I'll just use toruses for now. But yeah, and instead just using the array modifier with the empty as the relative offset object. However, I failed to think of that while I was creating this, and that's why I ended up manually placing each of the toruses or tori, whatever the original term is. I will Google that as soon as I finish this particular video. All of these videos are also to make mistakes, learn things, and figure out better ways of creating these animations. And as I learn, also show all of you people the different processes I went through. So initially I saw that they weren't going, it didn't look like the camera was going right through the toruses. So I increased the size of the circle so that it seemed a lot more like we were going through the toruses. if you all would actually want tutorial-like videos where I go through step by step of how to create things, do let me know in the comment section, and I'll start creating a few more tutorials as well, rather than these voiceovers of what exactly I'm doing. So at this point, I just had the texture on the toruses to also loop, although it wasn't that great of a loop, and it wasn't actually necessary that I realized later. I still had it, and I took care of that. Right after that, I wanted to create a few different particles that I was going to use. Not particles that I was going to use, different objects that I was going to use as particles for a particle system, and not just one. I thought I'd have like 4 or 5 particle systems. Most of them were supposed to be circles and dots. I thought I'd have one that's completely different, of a metallic texture, which is what I created over here. And essentially the triangle itself was still a circle, because I wanted to make everything out of circles and toruses, so it's just a circle but with only 3 vertices. So right here, what I wanted was not to show the torus that it was emitting from, and I tried out different methods of removing the torus. I tried to I knew that if I had it as wires, it would still be there, so I thought, okay, maybe I'll just have it as bounds, but the problem is all of the particles were also showing up as bounds and not the particles. So that's why that didn't work either, and yeah, essentially, at the moment, I couldn't come around a way to fix it, so I ended up just giving it a new material where the alpha was 0, and yeah, so it was essentially a see-through torus from which the particles came out. And I wanted to find a nice point in time where the particles were evenly distributed, and then I wanted to realize the instances, and make all the particles individual points. That took me a few tries to get right because I had to select the torus and then um, hit that make instances real button. That's something that I learned in the course of this particular video. The reason why I'm showing all of these mistakes that I'm making as I go around and the different things that I'm learning is because often I see new creators watch tutorials on YouTube and not realize that the people creating these tutorials have already done it once, and they know exactly what went well, what worked, what didn't work, and then came up with the perfect way to create these tutorials. And that sometimes demotivates these new creators, thinking that, okay, we are not able to create something that good in a single time. Like over here, as another mistake that I made, is the second particle system I realized is coming out as the exact same way, or in the exact same way that the first particle system was created. Now, I could have just changed the seed value and that would have randomized it and made everything perfect. But at the moment, the seed value just didn't click to me. So I instead had to try and change randomness and do all sorts of other types of things, which in my language is called jugaad. But yeah, so that's how I tried to get it. And I eventually got it to look all right. Essentially, there were so many more things that I learned while creating these particle systems. Like, I think eventually, as I added in these more particle systems, the initial particles were also re-emitted. So yeah, I was creating multiple particle systems instead of just having like when I was adding in the toruses, this torus particle system, there are also spherical particles coming out as well, which I didn't know why that was happening, but I just let it be because it was all right. My PC struggled a lot. My PC would have worked far better if it wasn't doing that. But as long as it was working, I didn't mind it. It looked good enough, so I would let it be. I feel like eventually I'll do a few more of these, except with different choices. Instead of having just toruses, maybe I'll have pentagons, hexagons, maybe octagons, and all as well, along with these triangles, so that I just have different number of vertices, maybe some squares, and have a similar loop. Choose a different color scheme and have more of this metallic reflection type of color and things like that. So right now what I did is I added in some lights of blue and red. Reason being, I'm going to be rendering all of these in Eevee, and honestly in cycles the reflections would have come out so much better on these triangles that I made, which I made like slightly reflective. They were metallic. However, I did include the screen space reflections and all of those as well. But even then, I thought that it was necessary to have some form of blue light as real light coming in. Not only blue, also red or pink, whatever this particular color is. I also realized that the first frame and last frame weren't, matching up, which is when I realized that for some reason particles were still being emitted even though I realized all of the particles. So what I did is I just deleted that entire emitter such that now I only had the particles. The rest of this is a lot of artistic freedom. I thought obviously the bloom was far too bright and it was just flushing out all of the other details in the entire loop. So I chose to clamp the value. And I also realized the way how I had these blue toruses right at the beginning, I realized that it was necessary for me to have pink ones as well. And now, had I used a different method of creating the toruses or placing them, I could have just duplicated them and then changed that particular color. However, since I did use the curve, the Bezier circle, as a path and then placed each of those toruses manually, I couldn't just duplicate them. And so essentially I was running out of time and I realized that it would just be faster to manually copy paste and place all of them along the curve. So that's what I did, and then I eventually changed the color. here I thought that it would be nice if everything was placed within a single torus so that I could have a texture to the torus. However, I went against that and decided to just have the texture on the world itself. So that's what I ended up doing. Essentially, when I made this particular thing, I wanted some more dots, and I wanted the dots to be red and blue. So that took me a while to figure out how to do it. This particular method that I was trying just wasn't working. However, now that I think about it, if I had the choice, I would have made them streaks so that it looked more like we were actually moving past it, and it would have given a slight feeling of motion blur. However, I didn't do that, and yeah, so it's just going to be very, very tiny, almost unnoticeable dots of red and blue. Also feeling like maybe if I did make those tiny lines the streaks of motion blur as we went about, that also might have just become an overkill. So I'm still pretty happy with the way the render came out, so I'll leave that as it is. And with that, we just rendered out one image to make sure that everything was looking right in the render. And the last thing left was to change the format to a video format and render the entire animation. And this is how it finally came out to look like. A perfectly seamless loop. This particular video is what I had initially used as inspiration to create this piece. Of course, I didn't want to make an exact copy, which is why you can clearly see that a lot of it is completely different. But this was what I initially saw to create this particular piece that I created. Stay tuned, make sure you subscribe. You can also watch this particular video over here. Make sure you also create as much as you can, and all the best. Stay tuned and enjoy.